This is Andrew here with ArcSpark Games. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on making kind of a really cool radar for your game in Godot. So I noticed there wasn't really a lot of tutorials for doing like radar specifically. I saw some for like mini maps, but I thought those were kind of simple versus this kind of gives you like a really cool kind of scanning effect. I'm going to kind of show you what I'm talking about right now. So if you see here, as the mobs and things get kind of scanned by the radar, they update their locations. And then when you kill a mob like this, they'll disappear and like look, the dark matter gets replaced. You like pick up an upgrade, it gets replaced. Your spaceship's this kind of green object right here. You like destroy your spaceship, kind of gets replaced. So anyways, so this is kind of one of my side projects that I'm working on. But this is kind of the radar up here in the top right corner. So that kind of gives you an idea of, you know, how things kind of show up on the radar, and it kind of gives you that cool scanning effect. These are all these mobs up here. If you kill them, they all turn into dark matter. You can like pick it all up. They disappear. So that's kind of the effect we're going for. I'm going to show you how to do that today. So let's go. Let's just quit the game really quick. So to be able to do this, there's going to be a couple things that you're going to have set up already. You're going to have obviously your player scene. You have to know kind of what you're scanning for. In my game, it's kind of, you know, mobs and ammo packs and health packs and dark matter and all these different things. So kind of have to know what you're scanning for. I'm going to kind of show you how to go from what you're scanning for to kind of how to do the scanner. So the first part of it is you have to have your player node, the thing that's going to be doing the scanning. So that's my player. This is my player node right here that I kind of pulled up here. If you come down to, oh, here it is, radar 2D. So if I zoom out, this kind of big square is my radar 2D. So if I hide it, you can kind of see, kind of changes itself. So anyways, what you want to do is you're going to want to add, oh, actually it's this giant one. Sorry, I have a couple different collision boxes here. It's this giant one is the actual radar, and you can tell because when I turn it off, it goes away. When I turn it back on, it comes back. So yeah, that's the big radar node. So what you're going to do is you're going to want to go and you're going to want to add a 2D node like this one to your player node, and you're going to add a 2D collision shape. And that 2D collision shape that you're going to add as a child to this radar 2D, you're going to give it whatever size you want your radar to be, which isn't, for my instance, it's very big because I expect the game area to be very big at a certain point. So you add that as a child, then inside of your player script, you want to take your area 2D and you want to connect two signals to it. You want to connect your body entered and your body exited. And that's pretty easy. You just kind of click here, you go to signals, you click body entered. Here, I'll connect this area shape just so you guys kind of know what I'm talking about really quick. You connect that, it kind of comes down here. And then you can kind of put stuff in it. That's how you would do the area 2D. The area shape entered, we're not actually needing that. We're actually going to do it based off of bodies. So I'm just going to go and disconnect this really quick. So anyways, so once you've connected both the radar 2D and body entered, you're going to have this kind of setup here where you have a function where you have the body entered and you have the radar 2D body exited. So there's two things going on here. So the first one is when a mob enters your radar detection area. So the first thing I do is I check if the body's name is not equal to your player's name, we're going to add it to the radar. Because you don't really want your own player that's going to be at the center of the radar showing up in the radar. So I just ignore essentially myself in that body array. And then obviously the other simple part is when somebody who leaves the array technically I don't have to put this line here, this if body name is not equal to self, so, because myself should never be in the array. The player should never be in the array. So I shouldn't have to do this logic, but I did anyways. The radar erased the body. So what this does is this takes that same array that you've created and it erases the body from it after the player exits, or the other player or the mobs or the ammo nodes or what have you exit the array. So that's pretty much what happens in your player node. Okay, now you actually have to go and you have to create a scene separately. And so in our instance, this scene is going to be under miscellaneous, I think. No, it's under miscellaneous. So there's a couple different parts of the scene. So I made this little sprite right here. This is a little sprite. I got a radar, it's just a normal 2D node, a sprite node, which is just my grid. I got an animated sprite, which is supposed to be the center thing. I had it animated and it was kind of blinking and I didn't really like it, so I just essentially said use frame1 always. I should probably go back and change that, but it works for what it is. Then you have this other node, this sprite that is essentially your bar. This is kind of your scanning bar. And there's a couple different parts to this that are important that we'll get into when we get into the code. The last thing you got to do is you got to add these two tween nodes. You just add them. You're going to do all the code for what the tween does inside of the radar script. So that's pretty much all the nodes you're going to have to add to your radar scene. It's going to be its own independent scene that you can then add to your HUD after the fact. Just a note for people watching this, this is kind of a more advanced tutorial. Like I'm not going to go through every step. So if you're feeling like you might be a little bit confused or whatever, leave a comment. I can send you an email kind of explaining, individual steps or anything like that if anybody wants that. I'm just kind of going over big picture points as I kind of go through this. So if there's any confusion, just hit me up on YouTube. I'm fairly accessible. So we're going to go into our radar script. So our radar script has a couple different things going on. So I made a bunch of different arrays. I made 3 different arrays. I made one for targets that are coming in. I have one for current targets, and then I have one for new targets. And I'm going to kind of explain the reasoning behind why I did it this way here in a little bit, just so you know 3 different arrays are going to be created. There's your radar sprite node. There's a bunch of sprites that I used. Technically, I can show you those really quick too, so you kind of know what you're looking for in a sprite. So let's see, go to art. I think it's in the UI, yeah. So they're just really simple, dots is what they are. And once again, I had them kind of blinking at first, and I didn't like that. So I kind of changed them. Even though they're animated sprites in the actual radar, they don't animate because I think they look better as just static images. So then you're going to have this var start, which is equal to true. It's going to start your tweens and everything. Then you're going to have a current world. Well, actually, you don't really need this. This is a relic of something when I was thinking about it. So yeah. Anyways, the first thing I'm going to do is I check to make sure that my parent is in the multiplayer. No, this is something unique to mine. You guys don't have to do this because I use the chat window that's in my HUD. I use it in other places in the game. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm not showing the radar if I'm in the multiplayer screen. It would only happen if it's attached to a player node, not necessarily like a different node or scene. So anyways, if that's not true, you set physics process to true. Then you set up these 2 tweens. And all these tweens do is they move the bar, this bar node, they move it back and forth. So it starts at -63 position. So for instance, if I was like to change this to like -100, you can see it's like way over here. But if it's like -63, it's like right there. The idea is it goes from -63 to, I think, 63. So it ends up on the other side like so. So that's kind of what the tweens do. And what I'll do is also post like a Google Drive share to like this code so you guys can kind of have it if you need it. So what ends up happening is you want to interpolate the property of position, which is the second one. It has to be passed as a string. If you say position without parentheses like this, you'll end up with a non-working tween. So you want to say for the sprite bar, we're going to interpolate the property position. And essentially we're going to say from the current position, we're going to move to this new position, which is this vector 2. It's essentially the current sprite's position plus this 126, which is essentially taking negative 63 to 63 is what that vector does. Kind of like what I showed you just a second ago. And then there's some like settings for like how fast you do it. I say it's going to take about 3 seconds overall for it to go from one side to the other. It's translinear, which just means it goes one way to the other, and it eases in and out to kind of give it that slow kind of moving back and forth feel. Kind of as it starts off a little bit slower and then speeds up a little bit in the middle, makes it look a little bit nicer, I think. Then for tween 2, you do the same thing, only you just do it the opposite direction. This kind of takes the tween back, or the bar back to where it was supposed to be. Then down here in physics process, this is where you kind of get into the meat of the whole thing, I would say. So first thing I do is I check if either of the tweens, if both the tweens aren't active, I start them again. The reason I do this is specifically because I had an issue where my radar would work great. Everything would show up like it was supposed to, but then I would switch scenes and it would stop. Essentially, this little bar would just stop because I would jump between like different worlds and it just would stop working for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why, probably because I was reparenting my player and it was essentially taking the HUD and the tweens away from the scene tree. That's what I venture. So I just put this in here to kind of say, hey, if these stop, just restart them. And it looks great. It actually starts them right from the beginning. Everything looks good. You set it to true. You reset some stuff. And then I do a little bit of housekeeping here where I essentially look at all the child nodes and I essentially just remove them if they're not the sprite node, which is that very important node right there. So that's pretty easy. So that just gets rid of, that kind of creates this effect where, so you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about. You have all those enemies and then you switch to a different scene, or the same scene accidentally, different scene, and they're gone. It removes all the current people that are on that radar at the time to kind of give it a fresh look, which I think looks really good. So the next part is you say if start, we start the first tween, then we set start to false. So that's pretty easy. Then what that does is it starts this tween. This tween down here just runs to completion. I also put the tween property down here, which I probably don't need it in ready if I'm going to have it down here. But, you know, everybody likes a good code artifact that's meaningless in the ready function. So then what ends up happening is as soon as this tween finishes, this tween 1, we start tween 2 right here. So I set up tween 2 and then I start tween 2. And then right here, tween 2 completes. It sets the settings for tween 1 and then starts tween 1 again. So that's pretty easy. This is the end of tween 1. Then it goes, all right, tween 2, this is what you do. Start. And then tween 2 finishes and it says, all right, tween 1, this is what you do. Start. That moves that bar back and forth that you guys kind of see. Now, to get that kind of, you know, radar effect where it's kind of showing up things and, you know, making them look nice, there's a little bit of math that goes into it. Not a whole bunch. I don't think it's that bad. I think if we were doing like a spinning radar, that would be a little bit more difficult, but it's still probably possible. I thought about doing it, but I kind of like how this one looks a little bit more. So the first thing you do is you get your parent because this scene has a parent that's the HUD, and that parent is the player, which is where we put the big collision box that I kind of showed you guys earlier. So that big collision box is essentially putting together that radar array, right? So we're essentially grabbing that radar array from our player node and we're putting it into our target array. Then I also set this new targets to 0, or well, essentially I just make it an empty array. Technically, I think I do have to do this because I think there's parts where I want to empty this out. So I think that's actually important. So then what you do is you take your target array and you say for a target in a target array. You want to say if the name doesn't, well, if it doesn't have this current node, that's essentially what this says. If it doesn't, that's what the bang says, has a node of this name, which is in this tree, we're going to do this thing. There's a little bit of housekeeping here on my side for my game specifically. You don't need this unless you want to add like a certain property. So like this 98, essentially players that are 98 in my game, they don't show up on the radar. So that's just kind of a property that's unique to my game. But if you don't want something to show up on the radar, you can literally just right in here, you can just say, okay, don't add this thing. And if this isn't equal to that kind of a thing. So that's pretty easy. Then what you do is you create a new animated sprite. You set that sprite's name equal to the target name. Then this is where you get kind of into the weird math stuff. So you want to say radar sprite position X is equal to the target position, which is that target node that's being passed to you, and minus your parent's position, so minus your player's position. And then you want to divide that by, I divide it by 28. But it really depends on how big your radar is and how big your collision box is. So the best way I can explain this is mine is about 28 times. My radar is about 28 times smaller than my collision box. So that's why I divide it by 28. Because you're essentially downscaling. Your collision box's coordinates are getting downscaled to your radar's coordinates. And then you do the same thing for your Y position. So this is going to be kind of a trial and error thing. Like if you look in my game, you're going to make your collision box and then you're going to kind of do some division. And you're going to kind of check and see and make sure like certain things like kind of disappear when they get to the end. Oop, wait, no, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to live a little bit longer before I did that to kind of show you guys that things in my radar, wait for the radar, kind of vanish if you get to the edge. So that kind of showed it there a little bit. Same thing with, there's this red enemy over here. Do I now have the ability to, oh my goodness. I don't have the ability to wall jump. Give me a second. So if I come up here, you see these guys here on the edge, and then I kind of like jump off. Oop. No. I gotta wait for it. The idea is, it's hard to show you, but the idea is they don't go past, the nodes don't go past this extension edge. Ooh, it looks like I jumped into the abyss. That's not good. There's supposed to be ground that kills my character. But anyways, so yeah, so they'll just kind of fall off on the edge. And if you do your division right and everything, your nodes should kind of fall off near the edge or the border of your radar, which is good. You don't necessarily have to do that. You could technically clamp the position to that of your exact position of your radar. But then what you'll end up happening is if you do a clamp, some of the nodes will show up on the edge and they'll be further out of your radar than the player will be able to see. So for instance, they might be running and it might show the node on the edge for a bit. Like there might be like a node right here. And it'll just show at the edge. And some radars do that in some games. Like they'll essentially say, this thing's really far away from you, but you can still see it on your radar and it's just at the very edge. So that's fine too. I didn't want that for my game, but you guys can do that. So anyways, past that point, so you do this little vector, not even really vector math, but you do this little division here. Then you go through and you essentially set up your sprites with different colors and stuff. So if it's a 0, I say it's a red sprite, which means it's like an enemy. If it's a 0 and it's named the space pod, then it's an ally. And I have like a dark sprite for dark matter, upgrade sprite. So essentially this is where you set your logic for how you want your sprite to look. Like I said, mine's kind of pretty simple right now. It's just one frame of an animated sprite. Then what you do is you hide the node. So this is kind of important because by hiding the node, so immediately when you come into the game, everything's technically in your radar. So even though you can't see it, it's all technically there because they're immediately part of your collision body. But you don't want to show them immediately. You want them to wait for the scanning bar to kind of go over them to show them and update their positions. So that's why you hide them, because the next part's going to be where we do that. Then you add them to your tree. So to kind of show you what the tree looks like right now, go into here. This is my player node. This is my HUD I was talking about, and then this is the radar. So these are all the star monsters from my game, and then the space pod and another star monster. So if you come over here, star monsters are these guys. This is the space pod. That kind of shows you how the nodes are added onto this. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So it gets a little weird when it comes to actually, what's the best way of explaining it? So the bar moves and you want it to update with the bar. So what you've got to do is you got to say if you have this target and your absolute value of your target position and your parent position, right? This kind of math we did up here. If this position is, if you remember correctly, this, I guess I could have said radar sprite. No, I couldn't have because technically it could be new nodes. But anyways, so yeah, you want to check for the node. That's the target. Then you want to essentially do this math again to find its position. Then you want to minus the sprite bar position. And you want to say less than 2. And the reason you do this absolute value is you want to make sure that you're exactly within 2 pixels. Or not 2 pixels, but like, meaning if you end up with like a negative pixel or a negative position, it still technically runs. Like, because what could end up happening is if your target position's in a certain spot, your parent position's in a certain spot, this number could be a very small negative number or a very big negative number. You don't want this bar to update if that's like negative 50, because negative 50 is technically less than 2, but by doing the absolute value, you prevent that from happening. So then you essentially say, okay, we're going to do that here. Then you say or, and then you do the same math, but you do it for position X. That's kind of like, oh, but then you do it for the other side, yeah. And then you do less than 2. So you do the same thing twice there. And what this does, well, this one's divided, obviously. But what this does is this makes it so it updates kind of on both sides. It updates at the current position, and then it also updates to the new position. So it's kind of hard to explain what that means, but I'll explain it. So meaning like if these guys were moving and my bar moves over them, it's going to update, the bar is going to update when it runs into the nodes on the sprite, but it'll also update if it runs into the actual new nodes too. Because when things on the radar are moving around, I guess the best way of explaining it is when things are on the radar are moving around, technically until the bar goes over them, they could be in a different spot. So what this does is if they move, it will update them to the spot where they move to, but it'll also update if it just runs into the previous sprite of that object in the radar. So you get kind of like this kind of movement effect where, like, let's say I moved way up. You see how it like updated them to there, even though it hadn't reached their previous sprite. So it'll update if it actually runs into them again, but it'll also update if it runs into their sprite again. So you get that kind of cool motion effect that kind of makes the radar look like it's finding things out of thin air, if that makes sense. That's kind of what that does. So the next thing you got to do is you got to get your target node on the position X, and you got to get your target node position Y, and you got to essentially reposition them to the new positions because this is them updating. Because like I said, you're going to come in, it's going to put all your targets into an array, and they're going to hide them all, but then you're going to be moving around and it might get updated. This is where it gets updated. Then at the last second, it's going to show them so they look good. And then I also modulate it a little bit to make them kind of glow a little bit to kind of give them that scan effect. You see that where it kind of lights them up a little bit. Then what I do is I push all their names to an array called new targets. I'll explain kind of what this does here in a second. So that's what you do for that part. And this is actually under this for targets. So essentially all end up, every target that is a target gets pushed into this new target array, all of them. Then what you do is you get your children, and those are your current targets. That's essentially like these guys, right? Your space pod, everybody. These are your current targets. So when one of these guys dies, let's kill one of them. What happens is, I'm going to kill the spaceship too. When one of them dies, you end up in a situation where you have to reconcile what's on the radar with what came in that's new. So by pushing everything that came in that's new to this new targets array, I can essentially take my children, and then I can do for current targets and current targets. I say if new targets has C target name, and C target name is not equal to sprite, what I end up doing is, and when I say not equal to sprite, I mean this node, because I want to keep this. It has all my tweens and my bar and all that stuff. I essentially say, all right, if my bar is near this thing, this is essentially the math I did before, but a little bit simplified, then I want to queue free this thing, because I want to say this thing is not in my current array. It came in the new targets, but it's one of my children, and it's not in my current targets, so I'm just going to queue free it. So that's really good. And what that does is it makes it so when you kill something or it moves outside of the radius or something to that effect, it actually is removed from your radar. Then the next thing you want to do is, this is kind of an else if. So if you're not removing a thing, what are you going to do? Well, we're going to modulate it. We're going to make it we're going to make it, if it's not near the bar, we're going to kind of lower the intensity of the colors a little bit. So that's what this kind of does. It just slowly minuses 0.015 from the modulate until it's down to 0.65. And that just kind of makes them kind of dim a little bit. You can kind of see that. See how they dim a little bit? Kind of gives them that effect of, maybe we don't know where this thing is because the radar bar hasn't scanned it in a second. Then you do the same thing. You check the position X. You're only checking position X when it comes to the bar, because that's all that matters. Position Y doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if something goes up or down. The bar covers the entire scannable surface as it moves across the X-plane. So we do the same thing here. And then what we do is we show it again, and we modulate it and kind of give it a little bit of a brighter look to kind of show like, hey, this thing's here. Boom. That kind of a update. So that's pretty much how that works. Like I said, this is a little bit unique to my game. I think some of the code still applies with the tweens and the bar. The exact math and everything is probably going to depend a little bit more on your game. But I think this works pretty well. I do think there's some efficiencies I could make, but I think as far as like usable code, I think this is pretty good. I feel like I could probably update the children and remove the children properly inside of just this one for loop up here. But I really like having this second one because I think it makes it a little bit more readable, and you're able to do these kind of like self-modulates in there and kind of have them separated out and be able to see them a little bit easier. And also, I think being able to push all the targets, their names specifically, into an array makes this run a little bit easier, because then you're simply just searching for a current target name in an array of names, versus if you just take in this new target node, you're going to be looking through actual nodes and you're going to have to look at their names specifically, and that's just a little bit more difficult. But I'm definitely open to suggestions. If anybody can think of a better way of doing this same sort of thing, leave a comment. If the video helped you out, if it was useful, like, subscribe. I hope to kind of make a little bit more of these as I kind of get more into unique mechanics of my game. I'm kind of currently working with Chad and Robbie on the new game, so we'll probably be putting out videos specifically for mechanics and things and that when we kind of get to that coding point. Right now we're still kind of in the plan and development stage, but anyways, so I do have a lot of really interesting stuff in this game. I will say I do want to demo more stuff. The radar was just kind of the simplest thing that I could do pretty quickly. Maybe in my next video I'll demo the multiplayer a little bit for you guys, because I think the multiplayer in Godot is actually really good, but it's a little confusing when you haven't done it before. That's the best way I can explain it. It works really well once you get it going. Like you can see, I'm having issues right here. It works pretty well once you can get it going, but it is a little confusing to start. There's a lot of interesting ideas behind it when it comes to like puppets and how they interact with each other and what they end up looking like. Oh god, it's so hard to kill this guy because I put all the upgrades on him and he's like way stronger than the other guy. Nope, I can't even kill him. Gravity bomb this guy. So anyways, yeah, so hopefully in the future I'll get to demo some of this other stuff, like a lot of the networking stuff. I made a chat box. I would like to demo the chat box because I think it works really well. But at the same time, I'm not gonna lie, the code's a little bit crazy. You would think making a chat box would be super simple in Godot, maybe, but yeah, not so much. At least not how I did it. But anyways, yeah. So those are some future video ideas. Hopefully, I'll get to put some more out there for you guys. So anyways, if you liked the video, if it helped, like, comment, subscribe. Comment if you think I could have done something better. Comment if it helped you out. I love to hear feedback. Well, thanks very much, guys, and have a good day.